was originally budgeted at, I think it was 22 billion. How much was it? 18.
Lower than that.
Yeah, 18. I think it was sold at 18 billion. And now I think the latest forecasts are 32 billion.
It depends on the currency values, but it's extraordinary escalation in price. Yeah.
Yeah, I
and
mean,
that's how far is it from being done?
So this is, I think 2025. They said it might be done.
Don't hold your breath, but it almost. I mean, it is still possible that it would not be completed, but I think it's almost. That's not a plausible scenario. I think it will come on stream, and will be locked into the contracts. It's. I think much more. One thing we haven't touched on really is in relation to climate targets, and just explaining the sheer intensity of the misunderstandings around nuclear power in relation to climate, especially in the UK. It's really interesting. People who have been to other countries like Germany and hear the way the debate plays out in those places. Ideas like base load, ideas that somehow we need nuclear for climate, without paying attention to the fact that it is so expensive and so much slower than the alternatives, and that the alternatives in the UK is blessed with the best renewable resource in Europe, especially
wind.
Paying attention to offshore wind. Yeah, that it's extraordinary. The debate in the UK is like it is. That the fact that that you see rising up, just no matter what position you take on nuclear, one could be pro or anti, legitimately in all kinds of ways. But why is it that we've seen a sudden flourishing in the UK of supposed environmentalists suddenly becoming pro-nuclear at a time when the relative case for nuclear is so weak? So I'm not dismissing the case for nuclear, I'm just saying it is relatively weak. Everyone can agree on that. And yet the amount of Twitter accounts, other social media accounts, organisations within the Green Party, for instance, prominent figures who very conspicuously change position, and they get a huge amount of attention again and again and again. Young people who hang out with Greta Thunberg suddenly being in all the newspapers, deciding they've changed their mind. Dear Greenpeace, stop this. So one doesn't have to be on one side or the other to see the pattern, especially in the nuclear weapon state like the UK. Our debates on energy are completely skewed. And it's not like we should, I'm not saying that we should there is a lot to still be said for nuclear, as well as for renewables. It's not a clear-cut thing. There's all sorts of nuances to it. But we're just not having a serious debate. It's, for me, the worst issue around nuclear is the way democracy gets attenuated.
Can I jump in, Ed? I went through waves of kind of things of like, this is what this film was really about, but definitely the democratic issues around nuclear power was something that I was really got more and more interested in, and I've tried to touch on it. But you mentioned the difference in the debate in this country versus other countries. Obviously, I spent some time in Germany, and we have two representatives of energy co-ops here. That's one of the big things that I feel is missing in the debate. I don't even really know that we have really a debate about it. The debate is very much like, yeah, do we need it for climate change or do we not need it for climate change? I think there doesn't seem to be much really debate about it. But I don't think you ever do hear about, that nuclear, you can't have, the SMR, small modular reactors, I saw one of the clips in the film had a copyright 2013. They've been around as a new idea for some time. They're still not, Rolls-Royce are in that game, they're still not really happening. But even those, the small modular reactors, I think, are still only about the size of the original sort of reactors that we were building in this country in the 50s and 60s. They're not small. You can't have like a neighbourhood nuclear cooperative. Nuclear power has to be owned either by states or by very large corporations. Increasingly, it seems to be those corporations are government-owned corporations. But that feels to me like a real issue that is not talked about. And it plays into where we are at the moment with everything that's going on in Ukraine and the energy crisis. Who owns our energy? And if we had gone down a different road sort of 15 years ago when Blair was saying, if current policy remains unchanged, if we had really gone, well, the previous Energy White Paper, the 2003 one, or we had said we were going to go really in for people, this is in the weeds of policy, but we had said in 2003 that we were not having any more nuclear, we were really going to go in for energy efficiency renewables, and then Blair had this second review, which was around the time I first started to get interested in this topic in 2006. And then in 2006 they looked again, and obviously I touched on it briefly, nowhere near as much detail as I talked to everybody about it. But suddenly we had a complete change, and if we had have stayed on that 2003 path, you know, we might be in a very different position now. And not to say that, you know, Putin would have not affected us in this country, but maybe it wouldn't have affected us if we had a much more, you know, decentralised, community-owned. If we had much more community ownership of energy, we would surely be in a more, I mean, I'm preaching to the converted, but we'd be in a more robust position to face these kind of external energy shocks.
Do you think with a forthcoming, perhaps, Labour administration next year, or whenever the general election is, if they win, they've got a manifesto pledge for 400 million support for renewables? It might even be community, I don't think it's community, maybe renewables every year. Do you think we might see a policy reversal like we saw then? Was it Tony Blair, or was it just a thing of getting into power and they just meet all these big industry guys?
I don't know. I mean, I don't have great hopes for Keir Starmer, but that's a different conversation. I don't know. My sense is that he's quite a sort of centralising authoritarian. Authoritarian? That's probably too strong, but you know, I don't know if he would. They're separate things. You know, as you say, renewables is not just community energy, obviously, but hopefully, well, certainly after the speech that we had yesterday around the net zero pledges, hopefully if we do have a new Labour government, we'll be going in the other direction than what was just been announced. But that's still a pretty low bar versus what we really need to be doing.
The thing is as more wind and solar comes on stream, if you think of the energy grid, if you compared the wind and solar, which is local power, and we know that it's the cheapest form of energy, so we know that we can offer a lower price because we're generating that electricity at a lower price, and also we're controlling it more locally. One of the biggest problems with putting a lot of renewables on the grid and having nuclear is nuclear always has to have what Andy was referring to as this baseload power, which is actually obsolete. Even the head of the national grid said 10 years ago that baseload power is obsolete. Even the government now admits that baseload power is obsolete, and they've also just admitted that there is a relationship. They kind of scoffed, didn't they? They kind of said, oh yeah, of course there's a relationship between the civil and the military nuclear program. So they're not pretending that that doesn't exist anymore. But the whole thing about this baseload power with nuclear, you can't shut nuclear off. So if you're generating a lot, like we have been recently with solar, generating quite a lot of electricity, and our potential with wind, then we just have to shut. We can't. That power gets wasted. So we need to look at storage. But if you're going to have storage, you don't need nuclear. So.
Well, I think that's a great point about taking up the base load. We've been looking at solar farms recently, and you'd be very lucky to get a solar farm connected by 2028 at the moment if you put in application now, because the grid's full everywhere, and it's also full of solar farm applications. But as you say, the base load taken up by nuclear is in there all the time, so it would free up that for more renewables. We've only got about 5 minutes left, so I just want to head out to the audience and see if you guys have got any questions. It's fascinating to chat. There it was. Have you got